The IV needle left a small bruise on the back of my hand that would fade in a week. But the phone call I made from that hospital bed would leave a mark that lasted much longer. My name is Kane, and this is the story of how losing my daughter taught me the difference between being heard and being seen. And why sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is stop protecting other people from your truth. I was 29 when I lost Leia. 18 weeks pregnant with my first child, a little girl we'd already named, already loved, already planned our entire future around. The nursery was painted pale green, neutral, we thought, though we secretly hoped for a daughter. I'd spent weekend afternoons folding tiny clothes into drawers that smelled like lavender sachets, reading parenting books that promised to prepare me for everything except this. The bleeding started on a Thursday night. I remember because Micah and I had just finished watching our weekly show, some mindless comedy that usually made us laugh. But that night, I couldn't focus on the screen. Something felt wrong in a way I couldn't name. The kind of knowing that lives in your bones before your brain catches up. I think we need to go to the hospital, I told Micah, my voice steady, despite the panic clawing at my chest. He didn't ask questions. He just grabbed his keys and helped me to the car, his hand warm and sure on my back as we drove through empty streets toward a truth I wasn't ready to face. The emergency room smelled like bleach and broken dreams. The ultrasound technician, a woman with tired eyes and gentle hands, moved the wand across my belly in silence that stretched like eternity. I watched her face, searching for the smile that had greeted us at every previous appointment, the one that said, "Look at your beautiful baby." It never came. "I'm going to get the doctor," she said instead, her voice carefully neutral. Dr. Martinez arrived 15 minutes later, with the kind of expression that medical professionals learn to wear when delivering devastating news. He was kind but clinical, explaining in words that felt like they were coming from underwater, that there was no heartbeat, that sometimes these things just happen, that it wasn't anything I did or didn't do. "I'm so sorry for your loss," he said. And I noticed how he used the past tense, as if Leia had already been decided. Already been filed away in the category of things that used to exist. The next few hours blurred together. Procedures and paperwork, decisions about what to do next. Micah's hand anchoring me to a world that suddenly felt untethered. But through it all, one thought kept surfacing. I needed to call my mom. I needed to hear her voice tell me that everything would be okay, that she was coming, that I wasn't alone in this impossible moment. That need, so basic, so human, is what led me to pick up the phone with shaking hands while I was still connected to IVs, still wearing a hospital gown that opened in the back, still trying to process that my body was no longer carrying the future I'd been building in my heart. I dialed my mother's number. 1 ring. 2. "Hey, sweetie!" Her voice was bright, cheerful in the way it always was when she answered my calls. "Everything okay?" The words stuck in my throat. How do you announce the end of everything? How do you say that the person you've been talking to for months, the granddaughter she'd been planning to spoil, was gone? "I lost the baby," I finally managed. "Mom, I lost her." There was a pause that felt like a held breath. Then her voice softened. But not in the way I'd imagined during all those nights I'd fantasized about this call that I'd prayed I'd never have to make. "Oh no, honey, I'm so sorry," she said. "But can I call you back? We're in the middle of your sister's gender reveal. The balloons are about to go up." I blinked at the ceiling tiles, certain I'd misheard. I was lying in a hospital bed, my baby gone, my world collapsed, and my mother was talking about party balloons. "Wait, what?" I asked. "You know we've been planning this for weeks. Marissa's big reveal is today. The whole family's here. We're about to pop the confetti. I'll call you back later, okay? Love you." She hung up, just like that. I stared at the phone screen until it went black, waiting for tears that wouldn't come. I was beyond crying. I felt like I was falling through a hole in the world, and no one had even noticed I was gone. That's when Micah walked back in with a plastic cup of water and a pack of crackers from the vending machine. He took one look at my face, and dropped everything. "What happened?" he asked, already moving toward me. "What did they say?" "They're at the gender reveal," I whispered. He waited, thinking there had to be more to the story. When he realized there wasn't, his jaw tightened in a way I'd rarely seen. "They what?" "They said they'd call later." Micah sat on the edge of my bed and gently took the phone from my hands. He didn't say anything else, just pulled me against his chest and let me fall apart in the space he created for my breaking. Later, people would tell me that my parents probably didn't understand how serious it was, that they were just trying to maintain normalcy, that grief makes people react in strange ways. But in that moment, lying in Micah's arms while I could hear celebration sounds drifting in from other rooms, new babies being born, families being created while mine was ending, I understood something fundamental about the difference between the love we hope for and the love we actually receive. The drive home the next day was quiet. I kept checking my phone, waiting for the follow-up call my mother had promised, the one where she'd ask how I was doing, when the funeral would be, if I needed anything. It never came. Instead, over the next few days, my social media feeds filled with pictures from Marissa's party. Pink balloons, smiling faces, my mother beaming proudly behind my sister as she held up a onesie that said, "Daddy's Little Princess." The caption read, "We're having a girl, so excited to welcome our first granddaughter." I turned off my phone and didn't turn it back on for 3 days. Grief, I learned, is not just about loss. It's about the space that loss creates and what fills that space when the people you expect to show up don't. For me, that space filled with a kind of clarity I'd never experienced before. For the first time in my adult life, I stopped making excuses for other people's choices. My parents had always been complicated. They loved me. I knew that. But theirs was a conditional kind of love that required me to be easy, uncomplicated, not too needy. I was the capable daughter, the one who didn't require much attention, the one who could be counted on to understand when other things took priority. I'd spent years perfecting this role, believing that if I just stayed grateful and uncomplicated enough, I'd eventually earn the kind of deep, unconditional love I watched them give my sister. Marissa had always been the golden child, more outgoing, more emotional, more willing to demand the attention she wanted. When she announced her pregnancy 6 weeks after mine, suddenly every family conversation revolved around her. Her morning sickness, her cravings, her plans for the nursery. I tried to be supportive, even helped plan her gender reveal party, thinking that maybe this shared experience of pregnancy would finally bring us closer. I was wrong. 10 days after I lost Leia, I received a text from my mother that would change everything between us forever. "Hi, Kane. We were wondering if you still had the nursery things. Marissa's starting to set up her baby room and we thought she could use them since you're not going to need them." I read it 3 times, each time feeling like I'd been slapped. Not only had they failed to check on me in over a week, but now they wanted to turn my daughter's belongings into hand-me-downs for my sister's celebration. My grief had become their convenience. I showed the message to Micah. He read it silently, then looked up at me with an expression I'd never seen before. Not anger exactly, but something deeper and more protective. "We should give them a box," he said quietly. "Just not the kind they're expecting." That night, I sat in Leia's nursery for the first time since coming home from the hospital. Everything was exactly as I'd left it. Tiny clothes folded neatly in drawers, stuffed animals lined up on the windowsill, a mobile above the crib that played a lullaby I couldn't bear to hear. The room felt sacred and abandoned at the same time, full of love with nowhere to go. I pulled out a box, not large, but sturdy, and began to fill it carefully. First, the hospital bracelets, mine and Leia's, still creased from where I'd clutched them. Then the tiny socks with yellow ducks that I'd bought during my second trimester on a day when I'd finally stopped being afraid that something might go wrong. A framed copy of our last ultrasound, where you could see her perfect profile, her little fist curled near her face. And then I wrote a letter. Her name was Leia. She was wanted. She was loved. She mattered. You didn't ask about her. You didn't come for me. You chose a party. This box is all you'll get from me. Not because I'm bitter, because I'm done pretending I wasn't broken when you looked the other way. I signed it and placed it on top of everything else. Micah helped me wrap the box in plain paper. No bows, no decoration, just clean edges and quiet weight. The next morning, we drove to my parents' house. I hadn't been there since the pregnancy announcement, back when my mother had hugged me and said she hoped the baby would have my eyes, when my father had offered to help paint a nursery someday. Now, walking up those familiar steps with the box in my hands, I felt like I was approaching strangers. My mother answered the door, surprised to see us. "Kane, Micah, we weren't expecting." I handed her the box. "These are the nursery items you asked for." She blinked, looking down at the wrapped package. "Oh, thank you. I know Marissa will appreciate." I didn't wait for her to finish. I turned and walked away, Micah beside me, silent and steady. As we reached the car, I looked back once to see my mother still standing in the doorway, the box in her hands, confusion written across her face. For 2 days, there was silence. No calls, no texts, no acknowledgement. I began to wonder if they'd even opened it, or if it was sitting in a corner somewhere, waiting for someone else to deal with. Then, on the 3rd day, my father called. "Kane," he said when I answered, his voice softer than I remembered. We opened the box. I said nothing, waiting. "I didn't know her name," he continued. "Laya, that's a beautiful name." "She was beautiful," I replied. Another pause. "I don't know what to say." "I'm not looking for anything," I told him. "Not anymore." "Your mother cried when she saw the socks," he said quietly. That hit me harder than I'd expected. I had imagined them reading the letter, imagined the uncomfortable silence, but I hadn't imagined tears, not from her. "She said she didn't know you were hurting that deeply," he added. I kept my voice steady. "She did. She just didn't want to deal with it." He didn't argue, which surprised me more than anything else he could have said. "I'm sorry," he finally said. "We both are." I didn't say it's okay, because it wasn't. I didn't say thank you, because I wasn't grateful that it had taken this much to get their attention. Instead, I said, I needed you to see her. Not just as something sad that happened to me, but as someone who was real, who existed. "We're going to keep the nursery things here," he said after a moment. "They belong to her." That was the first thing he'd gotten right. When I hung up, I felt something I hadn't experienced in weeks. Peace. Not the kind that comes from resolution or forgiveness, but the kind that comes from finally telling the truth and surviving it. The story doesn't end with a perfect reconciliation because real life rarely works that way. There was no dramatic family dinner where we all cried and apologized and promised to do better. Instead, there was space, careful, respectful distance that allowed us all to process what had happened without pretending it hadn't. My sister texted me a few days later. "I didn't know what happened until they opened the box. I'm sorry." I didn't respond immediately. Maybe someday I will, but not yet. Because sorry doesn't change the fact that while I was bleeding in a hospital bed, she was celebrating with pink confetti. I don't blame her for being happy. I blame her for pretending not to notice when I disappeared. What I learned during those dark weeks is that grief makes people uncomfortable. It disrupts the rhythm of what's easy and expected. Most people don't want to sit with you in your sorrow. They want you to get over it, smile through it, be polite while your world falls apart. I'd spent most of my life trying to protect other people from my feelings, believing that if I stayed easy to love, I'd always be included. But love that depends on your silence isn't love, it's convenience. Micah never asked me to be quiet. He didn't expect me to bounce back or hide my tears or explain the moments when I couldn't get out of bed. He just stayed. He listened when I wanted to speak and sat beside me when I couldn't. I didn't fully understand what it meant to be loved until I watched him hold my grief like it was sacred, not shameful. In the months that followed, I kept Laya's nursery exactly as it was. I bought a small nameplate and hung it above the crib. Laya Grace in soft gold letters. That room wasn't a failure. It was a memorial, a testament to the love that existed even when the future we'd planned didn't. Saying her name out loud doesn't hurt the way it used to. Now it feels like honoring her, like claiming the space she left behind. She existed. She changed me. And just because I don't get to raise her doesn't mean I stop being her mother. There are still days when I wake up and forget for a moment. That split second before memory rushes in and reminds me what was lost. And there are other days when I feel light again, when I can laugh without guilt, when I can sit in the nursery and feel calm instead of broken. I've learned that healing isn't about replacing grief with happiness. It's about learning to carry both, about accepting that some stories won't have the ending you wanted. But they still deserve to be told. My relationship with my parents remains complicated. We speak now, carefully, and with new boundaries I never knew I needed. They've made efforts to acknowledge Leia, to remember her birthday, to ask how I'm doing on the hard days. It's not the relationship I once hoped for, but it's honest in a way it never was before. Micah and I talk about trying again someday, not to replace Leia, but to honor what she taught us about love, about presence, about showing up when it's hardest. We've learned that love isn't noise or performance. It's being there in the silence, holding space for pain and joy to exist side by side. If you're reading this and you've lost something or someone, and the people you expected to hold you didn't show up, I want you to hear this. Your grief is not inconvenient. It is not a burden. You are allowed to speak your truth, even if it makes other people uncomfortable. You are allowed to ask to be seen. And if they still turn away, you are allowed to walk forward anyway. I carried Leia in my body for 4.5 months. I carry her in my heart every day. She lived. She mattered. And now, finally, so do I.